Hey Guildies, Fletch here. In all of our previous videos, Joe has always been older than Sue. What if Sue was older than Joe? What if the user input a bigger age for Sue than for Joe? Then would Sue be -2 years older than Joe? Well, let's change our code and make sure that this stuff makes sense. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to do something called conditional logic. So it's going to have a condition in here that says if this scenario happens, then we're going to calculate this way. But if this other scenario happens, we're going to calculate this other way. So let's go ahead and take a look at how that works. Let's first remember that one of our types of variables is Boolean, which we're going to call bool. And that's going to be Joe is older. So Joe is older is either going to be true or false. Is Joe older? How can we tell if Joe is older than not? We're going to use a very simple basic mathematical symbol. We're going to say age of Joe is greater than age of Sue. So what we're assigning here, remember that this equal symbol means we're assigning. So this value is going to go into here. This isn't a number. This isn't a string. This is a statement that says, is age of Joe greater than age of Sue? So we're saying age of Joe greater than age of Sue, and this will either evaluate to be true or false based on whatever the user inputs. If the user inputs 25 for the age of Joe and 27 for the age of Sue, then that'll be false. This would be a false statement because that would mean that Sue is larger than Joe, and you can change the symbol around, and in that case it would be true because I changed the symbol to the alligator facing towards Sue. Okay, so we're going to do like this because it's called Joe is older. The name, I happen to name this variable Joe is older. So if we run this, let's go ahead and make sure. Okay. We're going to run this. It should ask us what is the age of Joe. So let's go ahead and input 25. What is the age of Sue? 27. Okay, we hit a breakpoint. So is Joe older? Joe is 25. Sue is 27. Is Joe older? False. So this Boolean value, it's not a number. It's not a string. It's a Boolean, which means true or false. So is Joe older is false. So, okay, that worked exactly like we expected. So now we know if Joe is older, but what are we going to do about it? What we're going to do is we're going to say if, and specifically in this language, we're going to use the open close parentheses just like we did in a function previously, similar to this, but for a different reason. So inside of here, this is not a function call, but inside of here, we need to put a Boolean value. We could literally put we could literally put true, if true, but we don't want to put if true. We want to put whether or not Joe is older. So I'm going to say if Joe is older, and we're going to use these curly braces to create a scope. Scope is another thing I talked about in one of my previous videos of this is stuff that's going to happen. That none of the other stuff up here and down here, I was pointing to the screen like you can see that. None of this and none of this can see what's happening in here. This can affect stuff outside of it, but we'll get into that here later in a second. So if Joe is older, do this. Do this if Joe is older. Okay, so what we're going to say is right now age difference is always calculating as Joe minus Sue. So that works if Joe is older, then the age difference would be 2. But if the opposite happens like we did here, then the difference of age is going to be -2. And that may make sense somewhat mathematically depending on what your context is. But most of the time, if someone says, oh, what's your difference in age? Then you're going to want to say 2. You never say, oh, our difference is -2. So, to a human, that sounds weird. Let's move this up here. So age difference is age of Joe minus age of Sue. Instead, we're going to say age difference. We're just going to declare age difference here, and we're not going to do the assignment part. We're not going to assign the calculation yet. But we'll say if Joe is older, then age difference, we're going to assume. We're going to assign it now. So here we're declaring age difference as an integer. And then inside here, we're going to change its value. So age difference is now getting assigned age of Joe minus age of Sue. So if Joe is older, then do this calculation. But what if the opposite is true? What if we say Sue is older? Let's just go ahead and keep it just like that. So Sue is older would be true if this statement is true. So if age of Sue is greater than age of Joe. So now we're going to say if Sue is older, then age difference equals age of Sue minus age of Joe. So there we go. So now if Joe is older, this will run. But if Sue is older, this will run. But what if they're the same age? What if they happen to be the same age? So we can say bool Joe and Sue same age equals age of Joe equals age of Sue. So here's a new symbol that you haven't seen yet. Double equal sign. All of these equal signs that we've talked about before have been assignments, which means whatever this value is over here, which may be true or false, assign it into this variable. Whatever the value of this function is after someone does their input, whatever the final value of that input is, assign it into this variable. But here, double equal sign, it doesn't mean super assign, it means compare. So compare this, whether or not it equals this. So now if age of Joe equals, if they are the same, if these two things are the same, then that will either return true or false. This is a Boolean. So if they're equal, it'll be true. If they're not equal, it'll be false. So now let's do the same thing right here. If Joe and Sue are the same age, then age difference, we can just say equals 0. And this is an assignment of 0. So now we're saying age difference, assign it the value of 0, because if they're the same age, then the age difference is 0. All right, so let's go ahead and get it all on the screen here. So we have 3 different possibilities. So if Joe is older, if Sue is older, and if Joe and Sue are the same age. Those are the 3 different ways that we can calculate this. And that way we'll always have a positive number, including 0. I'm not going to run it right now. Let's go ahead and run it right now. I'm going to make one little difference. It was giving me a red underline because it's possible it doesn't know this. I'll go ahead and show you this. It's giving me a red underline saying age difference might never be assigned. Now we know as humans who understand math that one of these are going to hit. Either the age of Joe is bigger, or the age of Sue is bigger, or they're the same. There's literally no other possibility here. So we know that age difference is going to be assigned a value, but the Visual Studio or the IDE doesn't know exactly that. It's not checking these things like a human. It's just saying, oh, well, this is conditionally set. If this thing's true, whatever that thing is, then yeah, it'll get set. And this one, yeah, if that's true, it'll get set. And yeah, if that's true, it'll get set. But it's not literally evaluating them right now to see if they're true or false, to see if it ever gets set. So it just says at some point it needs to get set, and one of these might not run. One of these might not get entered into. So it's assuming you're never setting this. Just for now, I'm going to set it to definitely 0. But still, if age of Joe's older, it'll assign it differently. And if age of Sue is older, it'll assign it this way. And if they're equal, it'll just keep it 0 the same. So let's run it. What is the age of Joe? We're going to make him smaller this time. So we'll say like 58. What is the age of Sue? Let's say 90. Age difference is 32. So we didn't get a negative number. That's perfect. Okay, but we can simplify this. We're going to simplify this, and we're going to make sure that it gets assigned. We're going to say, first of all, let's put all of our Boolean checks at the top. Okay, so now we have all the Boolean checks being checked at the top. If Joe is older, if Sue is older, or if Joe and Sue are the same age. Okay, so then we can check them here. We'll check this one here, and if Joe is older, it'll do this. If Sue is older, it'll do this, and otherwise, it'll do this. But we can simplify this and make it more streamlined. We can put the word else. So if Joe is older, now let's go back 1 second. Like this, all three of these are going to attempt. It's going to do this condition right here, and if it's false, it'll skip it. But if it's true, it'll go inside of it. And then whether or not it goes inside of it is irrelevant. It's then going to say, well, if Sue is older, then try to do this. But if Sue is not older, then skip it. And then no matter what, it's going to say, if Joe and Sue are the same age, then do this. Otherwise, it's going to skip it. So it's going to try all three of those. But if I put the word else if, so this says, if Joe is older, then do this. And if that's true, it'll do it. And then these are otherwise. So otherwise do these things. So that means that if this ends up being true and it ends up doing this, then it won't do the otherwise. It'll be like, okay, well, we don't need to do the otherwise stuff. This was true. We did a thing. We're going to skip all the rest. It won't even attempt to look at those, whatever's in between these parentheses. So now we have that. So if Joe's older, do this. Else, if Sue is older, then do this. Else, if Joe and Sue are the same age, then do this. But you can see that it's still possible, according to the compiler, it's still possible that this never gets set. Now, as humans, we know that it's going to go into one of these, but it still doesn't quite see that. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to change this to just an else. Sorry, let me get rid of this. Just else. So we're going to say if Joe is older, do this. Otherwise, else if Sue is older, specifically if Sue is older instead. So if this is false, then let's go on. Okay, otherwise if Sue is older, we're going to do this. And then otherwise, not otherwise if, just if neither of those are true, then no matter what, set it to 0. So either this is going to be true and it's going to do this, or this is going to be true and it's going to do this. Otherwise, just pure raw catch all everything else. If both of these are false, then do this. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. Damn. We can run it. There's no red line here. Okay, so what is the age of Joe? 56. What is the age of Sue? 59. The difference is 3. All right. Given this, that this is how this works, you can also erase the else. I wanted to show you with this that there's a way to do, if these aren't true, then definitely fall through and do this. But we can even get rid of this and say, set it to 0 by default. So int age difference, we're declaring this variable here and we're assigning the value of 0. 0 might not be the right value. You know, they might not be the same age. But here we're not checking if they're the same age. We know as humans that if Joe is older, then we will change it. We'll assign it this value, Joe minus Sue. But if Sue is older, we know as humans that we're going to assign it this value, age difference, assign it Sue minus Joe. Otherwise, it won't do either of these. Otherwise, nothing. Otherwise, nothing will happen. So neither of these will happen. In that case, it's already defaulted to 0. We don't have to check if they're the same age. If Joe isn't older and Sue is not older, if neither of those things are true, then they are the same age. We know this as humans. So we can simplify it and say, if he's older, do this. Else, if Sue is older, then do this. And to simplify this even more, you don't have to assign these into a variable first. You don't have to evaluate this as a Boolean and assign it to Joe as older. We can just put it inside here and get rid of those. Because this is still a Boolean. This is an expression that says age of Joe greater than age of Sue. So this is an expression that represents something Boolean. if we try to put a number in here, it'll say you can't convert an integer to a Boolean. It knows that you need to have a Boolean right here, and you can't convert an integer to a Boolean, not in a strongly typed language. So we're going to say, if age of Joe is greater than age of Sue, then this is how you calculate the age difference. Otherwise, if age of Joe is less than the age of Sue, then calculate the age difference this way. Let's run it again. We know that we've tested a few times with Joe being bigger. Let's make sure it still works with Sue being bigger. So what is the age of Joe? We'll say 50. What is the age of, with Sue being smaller. What is the age of Sue? 45. The difference is 5. Perfect. So it works both ways at this point. Now, as you write code and you think logically and you think, okay, I can change the way things work based on some kind of input. Like if a character, if the keyboard is holding down W, if the user is holding down W, then make the character walk forward. If the character presses spacebar, then make the character jump. These are conditions on how the program should act based on whatever input that you want. So, so this is one way to do Boolean. Now you can think critically, and like I said, this was a lot bigger before, and I've cut it down into smaller and smaller bits. I can also get rid of this. So you have to be able to think logically about what your code does. And now I don't need to assign it here. So I can say age difference is a variable. I'm declaring that age difference is an integer, but I'm not assigning it anything. So I'm saying if age of Joe is greater than age of Sue, calculate it this way. Otherwise, now this is every other scenario. And every other scenario in this instance is either Sue is older or they're the same age. So if Sue is older, this definitely makes sense. But if they're the same age, let's say they're both 50, that would be 50 minus 50, which would be 0. So it still works exactly like we wanted it to. So here's a very simplified way to check the age difference with a condition. And it works for all the scenarios. So if this, then do this. Otherwise, for all other scenarios, do this. That means no matter what, age difference is getting assigned a variable. It's either this limited scope right here, in which case it gets assigned this way, or any other scenario, it's going to get assigned this way. It's being assigned, and here it is, age difference. So now we can run it again just to test it with an if-else statement instead of an if and an if-else and an else. This is an if, and this is an else. So let's run it. We'll do both ways. We'll do age of Joe is 50, age of Sue is 30. Their age difference is 20. Okay, let's run it again. This time we'll do 30 and 50. 30, 50. Their age difference is 20. There we go. So that's the basics of conditionals. There's a lot more to understand about conditionals, but you can really get started on writing a program like this. And I'd like to assign anyone who's learning programming watching these videos to now try to make your own program. Now that you can take input from the users, you can make some decisions in your code, not just do things, but make some decisions on how to do things. And you can give output back to the user. So inputs, outputs, and some logic in there. Go ahead and make a program. Make your first program. Do something this simple. Don't do something like, I'm going to go make a video game now, The New Legend of Zelda. Don't do something like that. Just something, a basic calculator or a basic, if they do this input, then give them this output, something like that. So I hope you like this video. I hope you like and subscribe, and I hope that you leave a comment, ask some questions, help me decide where to go from here based on where the learning curve is. And yeah, come back.